welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Brian Lomax.
And I'm Josh Berger. And in today's episode, we are going to be talking about Wimbledon, which just wrapped up. On the women's side, we saw Elena Rybakina win the title and faced Ons Jabeur in the finals. And on the men's side, we saw Novak Djokovic win the title for his 21st Grand Slam title against Nick Kyrgios, who was in the final for the first time. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about a number of themes of, related to sports psychology, related to the mental side of tennis, and some themes that we picked up both in the finals and in some of the dynamics that took place in each of those matches, but also earlier in the tournament. And these players earlier in the tournament, and then some other themes from some other players that we observed. And I think I think as we start to think about this, the men's final, which wrapped up just yesterday. We're recording this on Monday, the 11th, July 11th, and I think the men's final was interesting because it was really a clash of two very different both personalities and backgrounds, right? Where Djokovic, I believe this was his 32nd Grand Slam final. This was Nick Kyrgios' first. And then also in terms of personality, demeanor, they couldn't be more different. Djokovic was, calm, composed, relatively relaxed out there, considering the stakes, considering the circumstances. And Nick was Nick was Nick Kyrgios, right? In terms of the underhand serves, in terms of the, chirping and talking to himself and getting upset at various things. But I think that could be a good place to start, just because we saw such a contrast in terms of the two competitors out there. Not trying to take anything away from either of them, but that was one thing that stood out to me as I was watching yesterday.
And I think both players recognize that in their post-match press conferences. And I love reading the post-match press conference transcripts, because I think, as we've said a lot of times, Josh, it's really about the experience of the players, what they're experiencing. It's as opposed to what we are observing so much. And I think it's great to get their thoughts on what they believed happened. And both of them pointed to composure, especially Djokovic's composure, as being a key in the final. Of course, as you mentioned, there's a mismatch in experience in terms of playing Grand Slam finals. But yet, Nick played quite well, especially, his first set, the way he came out. He was serving very well, and Novak discussed how it's hard to play somebody who's serving so well. We see that in other aspects of the sport when anybody's playing somebody like in Isner, where John Isner, where the serve is so huge, and it puts a lot of pressure on you to hold your own serve when you're playing an opponent like that. You have that kind of scoreboard pressure of that. And of course, Novak is probably the best serve returner in the game now. And so it was important for him to maintain that composure throughout. And that was something that Nick noted in his press conference, was that he felt like that was one of the big differences in the match, was Novak's composure. Regardless of the score, he felt like he was never rattled. And I think that that's an important, like if we're thinking about a mental toughness or sports psychology thing, just look at how Nick Kyrgios noticed the composure of Novak Djokovic during the match, and that he was never rattled. That's a huge advantage for somebody like Djokovic, whether that's locker room power or just being professional out there. It's something the opponents will notice, and if they don't feel like you can be rattled, then that's going to have an effect on their ability to stay composed. Now, of course, like you mentioned, Nick does things differently, chirps a lot. So maybe did that have an effect on Nick's behavior? We don't know. He didn't necessarily say that, because it's kind of, he was doing things he's done in past matches. But I thought it was really kind of cool that Nick mentioned how composed Djokovic was, and yeah, obviously there's a level of experience there. So I think that was kind of a difference. But with that being said, Nick Kyrgios was there. If somehow he wins that 4-set tiebreaker, and he mentioned this, he felt like it was anybody's match in the fifth, and that's always true. That once you get into a fifth, anything can happen. I think Boris Becker was the one who said that the fifth set is not about tennis; it's about heart and fight, and that would have been an interesting thing, but it didn't happen, and Novak played great in the second, third, and fourth sets. I think John McEnroe said something like that. Some of the best tennis he's ever seen Novak play. And, when Novak gets into that mode of refusing to miss, and then he starts layering on a little bit of aggressiveness and power to his game, is extremely difficult to beat.
Absolutely. No, I think Novak has, especially when he's played well, especially when he's won Grand Slams, he gets into this mode, as you said, where he's missing very little, very infrequently, and very, as we know, very tough to beat somebody who doesn't beat themselves, who doesn't give you anything, who's also able to, maybe he doesn't serve with the same power of a Kyrgios or a Opelka or Isner, but he's able to hit spots. He's able to hit aces, especially when he really needs them. And, as solid as probably anybody in history from the baseline, not giving up a lot of errors, able to, manipulate the point and use tactics in order to pull opponents out of position and use power as needed, right? Maybe not be as powerful as a lot of the other guys, but play great defense, use great tactics, hit his spots. And as we look at these transcripts, as we look at the post-match interviews, I think there's a lot of good stuff here. One thing, from Kyrgios, he talked, and this wasn't in the final, but he talked earlier. I think it was maybe his pre-final press conference. He talked about how his experience in the Australian Open was a big factor in him getting to this point. And the Australian Open this year, him and his good friend Thanasi Kokkinakis, won the men's doubles championship there. And, he talked about, obviously it's different in terms of the endurance needed to get, win 7 matches at a Grand Slam in singles, and then to go all the way and win the doubles. But he started realizing how over the course of 2 weeks, you have to really be consistent and be committed. Where I think at other points of his career, he's talked openly about how, he's gone out and partied and stayed up really late at times and hasn't always committed in the way that maybe a true professional would, or in the way that's needed to win match after match in a 2-week span. So I think it sounded like in Australia, this past January, he noticed, okay, in order to be successful at that level, I have to be, playing my match and then focused on my recovery and then focused on the preparation and really commit to that side of things rather than simply just playing the match and, letting off some steam before the next one. So it sounded like that was a big factor in him believing that he could do it, or feeling like he had the tools to be successful at this level. I mean, it's also interesting with Nick Kyrgios, throughout his career, ever since he beat Nadal at Wimbledon, I think when he was 19, might need a fact check on that one, but I'm pretty sure, he has always had so many expectations on him. People have always been saying, oh, you could be number 1 in the world. You could be winning Grand Slams. Or maybe rather than could, people are saying should, right? You should be doing this. You should be doing that. Obviously, he's very talented. He has one of the world's biggest serves. He can hit winners from just about anywhere in the court. He's very athletic. So he has all of the physical tools. But at the same time, there have been things that have held him back. Um, Both, I think, from a mental health perspective, and he's talked openly about that, some of the struggles that he's had with depression and even having suicidal thoughts and self-harm. I think a few years back, he's talked about that more openly recently. So both from a mental health perspective and from a mental performance perspective, and I think we still do see that at times where his mental game on the court can seem to hold him back, whether it's getting upset with himself or getting upset with the people close to him in his box, right? And we saw that at times, him getting upset at them for maybe not cheering in the right way, or getting upset at the umpire or the line judges, or even having scuffs with opponents at times, whether it was Tsitsipas in this tournament or other players such as Wawrinka in the past, or other situations. But what I'm trying to say is that he has had these challenges in the past. And I think they continue to a certain extent on the mental performance side, certainly. But this is obviously a huge milestone and has the opportunity to be a huge stepping stone for him too, where this is his first Grand Slam final. And yes, there was a situation with Nadal, and perhaps we can talk more about that. But has now gotten to the point where people have, for so many years, said you ought to be doing this, you should be doing this, you're supposed to be number one, or supposed to be in Grand Slam finals, and he hadn't at that point. So I think a player can view a situation like this as a milestone and then look to, okay, what's next? How can I continue raising the stakes with my professionalism, with my mental game, with my time in between points? We talk a lot about how can you maximize that time in between points, and that's something when he's chirping to himself, or when he's getting upset about something and it seems like his focus is there in between points, maybe that's an area where he could continue to bring things to that next level. So I think there's a lot of good stuff here. I think a big part of it is him taking responsibility, where I know I drifted a little bit away from this, but as we look at the transcript, he was asked about Djokovic's composure and hunger to win, and asked about his own composure. And he sort of blew it off by saying, I think 126 players in the draw could improve their composure. So, that's, to me, that's sort of evading the question. But he said, yes, I can obviously improve on many things in my game, not just composure. So he seems to at least recognize that composure is one area that he can improve on. But yeah, I think it'll be very interesting to see where he goes from here, because I think it could be a turning point, right? In a positive way, certainly. So we'll see.
Well, perhaps 2022 is maybe the year that he begins to figure things out and emerges. I think this is also a theme with Elena Rybakina, is that everybody's on their own sort of path as to when their game matures, when they mature mentally and emotionally. And it doesn't have to be, 18, 19, then you've made it. So, and I don't think we should ever give up on anybody. I mean, even if we go back to Australia, Gael Monfils had a great tournament there. And he almost was having these thoughts of perhaps a little bit of regret of not committing so much earlier. But, he was where he was, and he had a great tournament. And maybe Nick is now starting to figure some of that out. The experiences are building and building, and hopefully in a positive way. Because I think his Australian Open experience, Josh, you were getting at this, winning that doubles title fueled belief. But he also noted how he felt like when he was on that court with Novak, he belonged there. And that's a good sense, right? We don't want people to feel like they're imposters out there. Like, how did I get here? I don't belong to be here. That almost always will lead to a poor performance. And I think anybody listening to this has probably felt that in certain situations where that they didn't belong. I know I felt that, playing at the first time at a high level, and it definitely affected how I performed. So it was great that he felt like he belonged. And he also noted that having wins over Novak in other matches helped. with that belief, although he did recognize that beating someone like Novak Djokovic in a 2 out of 3 set match is very different than a 3 out of 5, right? 2 out of 3, if you lose the first set, and really more quoting Kyrgios here, but there's not a lot of room to breathe after that. You have to win. But you lose the first set of a 3 out of 5, you can still settle in and be patient and wait to take your chances.
Especially if you're Djokovic.
Yeah, yeah. Given his conditioning as well, right, and everything, the way he plays, absolutely. So I think it's great to see Nick talking about his self-belief. I think that's awesome, and hopefully he can keep that together. Yes, his comment regarding composure, maybe evading it a little bit. I think he's right. Who couldn't work on their composure a little bit? And to be honest, Novak Djokovic hasn't always played every match with that kind of composure, but in general, when he's in a final, he's very difficult to beat. And so, what he did yesterday was great. And I'm sure the fact that he was playing a first-time finalist helped him with that composure, knowing that, all right, Nick's going to go through some ups and downs, not only with his game, but maybe also his own composure out there, and the steadier that he can be, opportunities will present themselves. And one of those, you mentioned, Josh, that when Djokovic is in that sort of refuse to miss mode, doesn't beat himself. And I think we've talked about this concept a couple of times about learning how not to lose. And there was a key game, I think it was in that third set, where Kyrgios was up 40-love. You can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but he was up 40-love on his serve. And Djokovic talked to himself about, all right, let's kind of just get him to play some points here. Let me just focus on getting the return back. And it put a little bit of pressure on Nick. And Nick ended up, in Djokovic's words, losing that game. Lost that game with unforced errors. Djokovic said he didn't win that game. But that ended up being a crucial break in that set. And it just shows various things going on there. We're up 40-love. What are we thinking? You down 40-love on the other guy's serve. Guy's serving huge. What are you thinking? That was one of 2 critical games in which Djokovic was down love 40 on his serve in an earlier game in the second set. He's down 40-love in this game. So important to keep the game going as a competitor. You don't know what could happen. The game is not over at 40-love. That just means the other player is much more likely to win that game, but that's not 100% certain. And those ended up being 2 of the more crucial moments in the match, looking back on it. So, with that, does, Nick Kyrgios, he's got a lot of positives, I think, coming out of this. In terms of the belief, if he can keep that going and keep the commitment piece going, like you were saying, Josh, because he did also say that he was very committed these 2 weeks. Got to the final, and he seemed to realize, like he said something about, and I lost, and I've been told that that's okay. It's good that he's got somebody on his team letting him know, hey, that's okay. You didn't, you built up a lot of experience here. Maybe like Ons Jabeur, you weren't quite ready to win this tournament, and so if he can use this as more positive fuel, who knows what could happen at the U.S. Open? I mean, anything could happen at the U.S. Open with Nick Kyrgios, but if he could continue to commit to doing this, I think it makes it very interesting. And he obviously is a guy who can beat anybody, and certainly when you go to a Nick Kyrgios match, you don't necessarily know what you're going to get.
Yeah, that is for sure. And I think it was interesting seeing, I think it's Prince George, the in line with the royal family, sitting in the front row at a Nick Kyrgios match at his age, at what is he, maybe around 8 years old or something. It's an interesting decision, but no, you certainly never know what you're going to get. And I think with somebody like him, he certainly has the ability to be enormously successful by locking in for those 2 weeks and for committing for 2 weeks, where you look at other players. And I think Djokovic would be a prime example of this. And Djokovic has talked a lot about his lifestyle and how his lifestyle, between his diet, between his sleep, between even the type of water that he drinks, between, the way I know he does a lot of stretching and yoga and flexibility, and that shows on the court. But I think there's also a difference, right, in terms of somebody committing long term and on a day-to-day basis, and somebody who's able to maybe, with his talent and everything, able to lock in for 2 weeks and reach a Grand Slam final. So I think that is important. But I actually wanted to go back to something from that transcript, from the interview, where Novak was asked about sort of a turning point. And I think we can also talk about, as we start to think more about the women's final as well, I think there was a pretty clear turning point as well in that match. But Djokovic was asked, he was asked a question, and he brought up this turning point. He was talking about, I felt more pressure than when I was 40-love down 4-all in the third. He was cruising through this game. So Nick was up 40-love, and they were at 4-all in the third set, and Nick ended up losing that game on his own serve. And Novak said, that 40-love game, he'll probably be very upset with himself for losing that game. I didn't win it. He lost that game with his unforced errors. And I just stayed there and pushed him to the limit, and I got the reward. So I think that's a very interesting quote, because there are moments where if you can stay out there, if you can continue to push somebody and sort of keep asking the question to them of, can they come up with the goods, you'll be rewarded for that. And especially, something like 4-all or in a tiebreaker, the stakes are a little higher, the pressure is a little higher. People will crumble, right? Nick was going for big second serves through most of the match, as he often does, and there were a couple double faults there. But I think, and also when it comes to playing the top players, you can't beat yourself. And I think that is ultimately what happened in that moment, right? It was a matter of multiple unforced errors from 40-love to end up losing that game. So I think that, that just shows, again, these are small margins between top players in the world, but that's often what it takes. It's one game here or there that can be that turning point. And, you're at 1-set-all, you're at 4-all, and there's a break of serve, and that's the third set. And then, you go into the fourth set, and obviously anything can happen, but especially tough to come back from 2-1 against, a front runner in the way that Djokovic is. So I think that was an interesting point, and an interesting point in the press conference. And I think it was certainly a turning point in that match.
Yeah, definitely. And again, getting back to the concept of learning how not to lose. And these are the moments in which you have to kind of lock things down. And 40-love leave, you need to close that out. And you hate to look back and say, yeah, I lost that game. And then, at that moment in time, of course, it's not a turning point. We can only describe it as a turning point now that the match is over, because everything played out. But who's to say that Nick couldn't just break right back? Could have. He didn't, but he could have. That's tennis always gives you the chance to come back, reset, etc. So I think this is also, like you were saying, with Jabeur, there was also a turning point against Rybakina in that match. I think we both identified the same one. And again, a little bit of learning how not to lose is I think the theme of what happened there. Now, in that match, of course, we had 2 first-time finalists. And the turning point that we identified was Jabeur's first service game in the second set. And she made really a couple of poor unforced errors to allow Rybakina to get to 30-all, and then Rybakina was able to really seize the moment and be more comfortable. And I think that beginning of the second set to me is sometimes an unrealized critical moment in every match. And a lot can turn on that. Doesn't always do that. And it won't always play out that way. But it's a time in which we want to raise our focus, raise our intensity, and really um, be solid with our game, be disciplined with our game. And with Ons, discipline isn't necessarily a word I would describe with her game because she has so many options. She's often it feels like just too many options. It's hard to have a lot of discipline when have 400 different shots you could hit based on what is coming at you. And there must be a lot of choice going on out there, as opposed to, say, like a Novak Djokovic, who I think has a very clear decision framework about where he hits the ball from what parts of the court. He's sort of the ultimate high percentage shot player. And of course, he'll break those patterns every now and then because you can't be super predictable. But then there's also the idea of being, almost trying to be too unpredictable. And I think Jabeur plays with very low margin over the net, tons of variety. And I think, excuse me, she helped Rybakina actually settle down in the beginning of that second set. And, excuse me, she was able to run with it after that. I think her serve came online. She started to feel her ground stroke. She started fielding those drop shots much better. So, again, though, Jabeur could have come back from that. So we identified that as a turning point now. But in that moment, it didn't have to be. So what were your thoughts about that game, Josh?
Yeah, I think that was definitely a turning point. I think that was definitely a moment when, Jabeur was pretty comfortable in that first set. And had she gotten off to a early lead in the second, we often see that's the end, right? Or that's
especially with two first-time finalists, right? I mean,
right, exactly. And I think especially once somebody's down a set in a break, it can be very hard to have that to keep your self-belief during that moment, and to keep believing, hey, I can come back and do this. But if you lose the first set and then you break to start the second, it's a totally different mindset where, okay, I'm up, I'm winning here. This set is now mine to lose in a certain way. Obviously, there's a long way to go, but it's just a completely different mindset. And I think with Jabeur, it's very interesting. And I think she often gets a lot of credit for good reason for the variety in her game. And that's deserved. And that actually sets her apart from a lot of her peers. She uses the slice very well. She uses the drop shot exceptionally. She volleys well. She has great hands up at the net. And I think when it comes to variety, and I think actually there's a lot of parallels between her and somebody like an Ash Barty, in many ways. But I think when it comes to variety, obviously that's great. Obviously it keeps people guessing, but it can also work against you a little bit if you rely on it too much. If rather than, sort of playing that high percentage shot, as you were talking about with Djokovic, rather than playing that high percentage shot at times, you go to the unexpected shot, or you go to that drop shot too often, right? The drop shot is the drop shot, if we're talking about that specifically, is most effective when it's a surprise, when it's a surprise tactic, when maybe you're inside the court, inside the baseline, and the opponent expects you to crush the ball into one corner or the other, and maybe they're behind the baseline, and then you go for a drop shot and they're completely not ready for it. But when a player uses the drop shot too much, and I think we see this not just with Jabeur, I think Carlos Alcaraz, who obviously has an exceptional drop shot too, can fall into this trap. Once the drop shot is used too much, it starts to be expected, starts to be less of a surprise, and becomes a lot less effective. And I think we saw that where in the first set, Jabeur was using the drop shot and bringing Rybakina to the, if Rybakina even was able to return it, she would be at the net and didn't seem quite as comfortable there. But then it seemed like at that point in the match, early in that second set, and then after, Rybakina was able to get to, maybe was expecting it more, was able to get to the drop shots, and then was able to capitalize more on them by, playing well at the net. So part of that could have just been that she got used to it, she settled in, but part of it also that she was expecting it and ready for it at that point, maybe because Jabeur was, using it a little bit too much or even relying on it too much at that point.
And I think the other sort of on the flip side of that with the drop shot is Rybakina was playing better and better. I think Jabeur was feeling that pressure and probably didn't feel like she could be hanging in these rallies as much. And so sometimes the drop shot can end up being a way out of the point, one way or another. All right. You're trying to end it. And, you know, we don't know that for sure, but that, I have felt that. I think you see that with a lot of players that their rally tolerance just isn't high enough and they need some exit from the point. And it ends up oftentimes manifesting itself with low percentage shots. And certainly the drop shot is such a finesse shot that it requires, really good feel. It requires confidence. You have to be, somewhat loose with your body. It's a tougher shot to pull off when you're feeling tight and pressured. And so, even the quality of her drop shots, some were still really good, but others were, sat up a little bit more. And Rybakina was able to retrieve those. So I think also got to give Rybakina some credit for putting on so much pressure that, Ons felt like she had to do this. So that was an interesting dynamic, I thought. And I do think things really changed at the beginning of that second set. And I don't know about you, Josh, but I just didn't feel like once Rybakina kind of got into the match, I didn't feel like she was going to lose. Now, of course, anything can happen in tennis, especially when neither player has been there before. But it felt like if the tennis was going to go along in that way, her game was just looking more solid than Jabeur. And I would say mentally, too, she was quite composed, very calm throughout that. I mean, super calm even after winning the title. But I guess that's kind of who she is. And so I think there's kind of two dynamics to that whole drop shot situation and what was really going on there.
Definitely. I think it definitely was not just Ons and the drop shots. It was also, the fact that Rybakina was handling them better, the fact that she settled into that match, maybe had some nerves in that first set, which would be understandable for anybody in a Wimbledon final. And yeah, I mean, her serve is something that she had relied on all tournament long. I mean, throughout her career, really. And I think in that first set, she didn't have any aces where she had been leading the tournament and on the women's side and aces up to that point. So she wasn't able to, use that weapon effectively up to that point. But as she settled in, as she started to serve better, as she started to just, play more solidly from the baseline, less things started to face her, like some of that variety in the drop shots and some of the surprises.
Yeah, and I think let's perhaps look at some of the quotes from these two players because I think they were interesting and revealed some different themes than the guys did. So I'll start with Ons Jabeur because I think she has really been climbing up the rankings. Has wanted to be a top 5 player. Has wanted to win a Grand Slam. She hasn't quite got that, and she noted that that she wasn't quite ready to win a title of this magnitude, but that this is some great experience for her. And a lot of times you just need that experience. You just need the experience of going and seeing what it's like. And now that she knows what it's like to be in a Grand Slam final, if she's in another one, she will surely handle it better. And her belief is that she will win a Grand Slam title at some point. And that's, again, similar to with Nick Kyrgios and that self-belief. You have to have that. You have to go into these tournaments believing that you can win those. So, but I thought she had some cool quotes, Josh, that I wanted to share because I think they're great perspectives. So the first one is tennis is just a sport for me. The most important thing that I feel is that I feel good about myself. And this is good because sometimes players do tend to identify as tennis players a little too much. And that's where success and failure on the court can start to have effects on other aspects of a person's life. But I think, when we have talked about tennis more as a life project, that also helps you separate it from your identity as a person. It's something that you do. It's a project in your life. It's not everything about you. So it's great that she has that perspective. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that. But also, she said, I'm a really positive person. It is what it is, meaning the loss. I'm very happy. That will give me definitely a lot of confidence to play more, right? The experience of doing this will give her a lot of confidence. She's generally a happy person. I think you were telling me how she's been dubbed the Minister of Happiness, right, on the WTA tour. Having more positive emotions absolutely can help build something that we call psychological capital. In essence, your mental toughness. So the more positive that you can be thinking, the easier it is to handle difficult situations. So like the difficulty of such a big disappointment can be handled much more easily when you are more positive and optimistic for the future. So I think we won't see this loss have a detrimental effect. If anything, it will just be help her continue to play better and better. She was talking about how she's really looking forward to the U.S. Open series, or the U.S. Open. And so I think this could, again, for similar to Nick Kyrgios, 2022 could be a great year for Ons Jabeur.
Certainly, and she's made so much progress with her game, and it deserves to be in this moment. And I think has really been obviously Iga Swiatek has taken, for good reason, most of the headlines this year, and has been on up until this tournament was on an unbelievable winning streak, but has really been the clear second best player in the world this year, and deserves this credit and should really view this as a stepping stone. And it seems like especially with those quotes, is viewing it in a really productive way, that okay, this is I wasn't ready to do it, and I can use this as a way to help me get to that next level. I'm excited to go to the US, and let's see what happens there. And with her game, again, we talk about her variety, she can really be effective on every surface. So it's just a matter of I think using some of those shots as weapons, as tools, and not feeling the need to rely on them, feeling like she can hang in those rallies longer, feeling like she can play at times a more traditional style, and then bring out that variety as really a separating factor. I actually wanted to bring up a piece of Rybakina's press conference as well, where she was asked about the nerves, right? So the question was, you said on the court you were nervous before the match and during it. How did you manage your nerves? And I think the way that she responds to this question and the next question have a lot to do with that, sports psychology, self-talk piece that we talk a lot about on this podcast. So here's what she said. She said, yes, I was super nervous. Yesterday I had a good practice, but in the evening I already started to feel like I'm too nervous. In the morning also, right? And we would expect that, right? Going into a big match, you're gonna feel some additional nerves. And in fact, if you don't, maybe that's a different, maybe that's a problem. But okay, so she said that. And then she said, but I was just trying to tell myself that it's a match, and I already had experience. I mean, for me, the worst thing, if you're up, then you lose the match. Unfortunately, I had many matches like this, so maybe it helped me a bit. I was trying to convince myself that it might happen again, and hopefully it's not the last time I'm in the final. Not the first, not the last. I already did a great job with my team. With these kinds of words, I was trying to calm myself down. So she talks about how she was, using her self-talk, trying to intentionally calm herself down by reminding herself, ultimately, this is a match. I've been in plenty of matches before. Yes, it's a Wimbledon final. Yes, it may feel different, but ultimately, you have to play that match against whoever's in front of you, right? You have to play the dynamics of the match. You don't constantly want to be thinking about, okay, this is a Wimbledon final. All these people are watching on TV. There's a huge paycheck on the line here, and generally there's ranking points, and thinking about these factors, you want to be focused on the fact that this is a match, and the fact that you have the experience. You've been in you've been in similar situations before, and she said I had many matches like this, so that helped her a bit. And then the next question, which is connected to this, the question from the press conference was, were you saying that to yourself during the match? And she said, yes, during the match, of course, because I didn't start well. And she lost the first set. After I was just trying to tell these things to myself. Then I just focused completely on the match and what I had to do. Ons, I mean, she played unbelievable. She's a very tough opponent with all the drop shots and everything. After I just moved completely to the match and was focused point by point. So, she talked about she didn't start well, right? That first set was not her best tennis, but she was trying to tell herself these things. She was trying to remind herself that she's been there, that it's just a match. And that last piece that she said that was focused point by point, right? Rather than getting ahead of ourselves, focusing on winning the match, focusing on beating the opponent, on winning the title and all this stuff, focusing on point by point, focusing on that next point in front of you, which is really the only one that you have any sort of impact over. So I think from a, mental toughness perspective that she brought up a lot of great points there.
Yeah, and I like the value of experience. Again, we've been talking a lot about that in our last few episodes of these are a lot of necessary experiences that players have to go through. So, like she said, being up a set and losing, unpleasant at the time, but certainly if you're open to it, an experience you can learn from and come back from better. Yeah, I like the idea though of her focusing point by point and fighting. Fighting is I would say controllable. And one of the things that we want to make sure that we're doing in moments like that is having a high standard on our controllable behaviors. So having a fighting attitude is one of those. Taking your time between points, having some discipline with your game, those are all things that are controllable in that moment. And it's great that she was able to talk to herself to bring that about. It'd be very interesting, if she was using, we've talked about the coaching voice here, using your name, using second person. Be interesting to understand how she was actually phrasing that in her mind. But the fact is that she used some great self-talk to get her focused on what she needed to do. And it wasn't negative. It wasn't pessimistic. And so it really can't be. To get to this level of play, to get to a Wimbledon final, a player has to have at least, some level of mastery over how they speak to themselves. When we talk about learning how not to lose, mastering your self-talk is certainly one aspect of that. Because if your self-talk is at all negative or pessimistic, you've lost focus on fighting the opponent, and now you're simply battling yourself out there. And tennis is too hard, especially at the professional level, to have two opponents, yourself and then the person on the other side of the court. So great to see that is a wonderful example of self-talk being used in the moment to get through a tough situation and then come out with such a great outcome and result for her. So, yeah, I'm really excited to see what she does this summer, Josh, on hard courts. Again, like you were saying, she's been working really hard and been ascending the rankings. If there were points, she would be in the top 10. But there aren't, and I think all the players, there was some discussion of this with Djokovic as well, because he's going to drop it to number 7 now. But they all had a good recognition of it is what it is, and that they can't change that aspect of things. So you have to deal with the hand that you're dealt, and that's all you can do as a player. I think there was some of that with respect to Kyrgios getting the walkover from Nadal, because he did mention that it might have been helpful to have played a semi, but who knows? His body could have used the break too. But it's certainly not Nick's fault that he didn't have a semifinal match, and you just have to deal with what's in front of you. And I think Rybakina showed that was the way to approach that final.
Certainly, and I actually wanted to add in something else from Rybakina and from that press conference. I'm not sure if you picked up on this or what your thoughts are, and I don't think I'm pretty confident we haven't talked about this, but we talked about the fact that there's no points at Wimbledon. And obviously there's a reason for that, right? With Wimbledon making the decision to not allow Russian or Belarusian players. And I'm sure many of our listeners know this, but Elena Rybakina was born in Russia and has represented Kazakhstan since 2018, for the past few years. And what I thought was interesting, again, continuing with our perspective here, we're not getting into the politics of everything, but she was asked a couple times about this, and I really liked the way that she responded. Where one of the questions was, again, this is right after she's won Wimbledon. I appreciate you represent Kazakhstan. You obviously have Russian links. Is there a concern that Russia may try to politicize this particular win? So that was one question. Another question, she was straight up asked, do you condemn the war and Putin's actions? I think people would like to know what your stance is. So she was asked pretty straight up on both of these things. And what I liked is that rather than sort of getting sucked into these types of questions and sort of bringing the attention away from her win and maybe causing a headline with, her response on the war and on Russia and Putin and all that, she was able to respond in a way, and actually I think in a very intelligent, almost politically savvy way, of sort of pushing the question away and not answering it. She said for the first question, I don't know. For me, as I said on the previous interviews, I'm playing for Kazakhstan, very, very long time. I represented the biggest tournaments, Olympics, which is dream come true. I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, it's always some news, but I cannot do anything about this. And on the second one, she said, sorry, my English is not the greatest. I didn't understand the second part of the question. From my side, I can only say that I'm representing Kazakhstan. I didn't choose where I was born. People believed in me. Kazakhstan supported me so much. Even today, I heard so many support. I saw the flags, so I don't know how to answer the questions. So, she, as she said, she didn't choose where she was born. She was not supported by the Russian Federation, and Kazakhstan really believed in her and supported her. And she represents them. She does not control Wimbledon's decision to, not allow Russian, Belarusian players. And she's represented Kazakhstan. She's gotten a lot of support from the federation. The president of the federation was there. She talked about that during this interview too. People can read about that in the transcript. We can post that in the show notes. And, I like that she wasn't distracted by these sorts of questions that I think really have the intention to distract. I mean, also, I think people are maybe limited in what they can even say. And I think we saw this with some of the other, with some of the players that were representing Russia, like Medvedev and Rublev on the men's side, that were straight up asked about things like this and maybe don't have the ability to speak openly about that because of what some of those consequences to them or their families could be. So I like that she pushed off the question and really didn't answer it and didn't get sucked into that sort of a distraction, because I think that was a potentially dangerous trap that she avoided.
As you said, is a politically savvy response. My guess is that she and her team have prepared her to receive these questions, and that this be the way we deflect. So answer the question, in the way you want to answer it, or answer the question that you want to, have or state. So, I think it's great that she was able to deflect, because I think sometimes these are trick questions that people in the media try to throw out there and create a story where, as you said, Josh, this was asked after the Wimbledon final. This had nothing to do with anything. In terms of what happened on that particular day, that there was no real need for these questions, but I'm sure she was prepared for it, which is, something all players who face the press need to be prepared for, so that you don't end up creating a story you didn't mean to create. And this is why athletes, especially in America, I know in American pro sports this happens. I'm not sure about other professional sports around the world, but many of them do go through, media training, and so that's important.
Certainly, and I think especially as a player rises the ranks and goes through some of that media training, and especially when you're in under the headlights, and you expect that you're going to be asked about things like this, especially during this type of a time. Yeah, she handled it really well, and she's also, I think, received maybe not criticism, but questions just for her very muted reaction. Right, she won Wimbledon, didn't really react in a overwhelmingly excited way, or she wasn't overflowing with emotions, I think, to say the least. She was pretty stoic and did not show many emotions at all. And I think what's important is that she is able to be herself out there, and not feel like she has to, she won Wimbledon, she doesn't have to worry about how she reacted, or maybe that reaction wasn't what other people wanted. But she can be herself, and act in a way that's really true to her. And again, we'll see with her. She certainly has all the tools in her game, is able to play very powerfully, stay very calm out there, and play point by point, as she talked about. And we'll see. This could be a huge, maybe not in terms of ranking, but in terms of what she's able to do at this point, going forward. I think I'm very excited to see. And a lot of players, a lot of champions and legends of our sport, including Roger Federer, have talked about how winning their first Grand Slam title was just a huge moment in their career, in terms of believing, self-belief, and believing that they could do it. And sort of, once they were able to get over that hump, things became a lot easier. So once a player is able to do it, and of course on the men's side, we haven't seen that too much, with the dominance of Nadal, Djokovic, Federer, Andy Murray as well, over the last 15 plus, I guess like 17 or so years. So we haven't seen as many first-time champions on the men's side, but on the women's side, we've certainly seen a number of them. And I think it could go either way, right? I think for some players, almost like a Dominic Thiem, they win that first title, and then they maybe struggle with, okay, what comes next? And obviously he's had injuries as well that have been really tough. But for many players, that first title is really that launching pad for that next chapter, and them continuing to really be successful. And maybe that takes time. I mean, for instance, Iga Swiatek, she won the 2020 French Open, and then I think it took her a little bit of time to continue to build on that. But as we've seen this year, she's been unbelievable. And then, yes, she lost here at Wimbledon, but in general, she has been by far and away the dominant player on tour. So it'll be very interesting to see what comes next for her.
Yeah, and I would say that is true of all the finalists. So, Djokovic, he's waiting to see what will happen with the U.S. and its vaccine requirements, etc. But certainly Kyrgios, Ons Jabeur, and Elena Rybakina certainly have a lot to look forward to this summer. We'll see if they can continue what they've started in 2022. Well, that's our show for today. Thanks, Josh, for a great discussion. Thank all of you for listening. If you have any feedback or questions, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. You can also use the Twitter hashtag tennisiq. Additionally, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube, so you can be notified of new episodes. You can also check us out on Instagram. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.